we are not starting from zero, right? We know there's additional supports there. We will build plans with additional supports and without, just to show you worst case and best case scenario. But we need to understand federal law and government benefits on a state and national level. When we talk about financial planning, what other resources are out there, or what should you be looking at as a parent? ABLE account, special needs trust, funding the deficit. What should we be talking about? We talk about person-centered planning. So, when we talk about residential options, there's kind of a funnel, and we're going to go through it 100 times today of what questions you should be asking in a certain order for that to make sense. Meaning you can't put the carriage in front of the horse, essentially. And so we're going to talk about person-centered planning, the questions outside of the normal box that we should be asking. Federal housing programs, and then of course planning strategies, certain solutions to a few problems that might come up. There are a few slides on doing it yourself, kind of do-it-yourself kit. So if you had your own home, either it's paid off or not, but you deeded that to a special needs trust, you didn't want to use any public residential facilities or any of the big residential facilities around the state, especially the state-specific facilities. We wanted to do it ourselves. There's a few slides that we'll get to, and that's what Tinge and I see as the kind of the wave in our community. Is a lot of parents are fed up with the state's lack of resources, and they're just going to do it themselves. They're going to partner with other families. They're going to create a home for their kid and their family, the other family's kids, and that's what we'll talk about, and we'll jump into it. So when we talk about lifelong planning, I get it. It's really not just stressful, but almost abnormal at times. It doesn't feel real. I mean, we're essentially asking to remove yourself from the situation and say, what are the next 50, 60 years hold for your child's life? Because their life expectancy goes into the 70s, 80s, sometimes early 90s. I mean, we talked with Brookwood earlier today. Their oldest citizen, 74 years old. And so when we think about the longevity of this plan, we're thinking decades and decades. We're not thinking 20 or 30 years. We're thinking longer than that. We want to create this vision. It's a want versus a need. What do you want the lifestyle to look like? What do you want the residential place to look like? What do you want that situation to be? Need is, okay, gosh, we didn't do any planning. We need to get X, Y, and Z implemented. That's why we're talking today, is so that you can create the vision, you can create this plan of this, what I want to be. It's extremely important to plan now, then wait. And I think that's on the next slide of, it's never too early to start planning. And some advice that we give our clients is, the word transitions thrown around this community as a buzzword. I mean, everything's a transition, right? Transition to work, transition to high school, middle school, transition to college, whatever that word means. This is what we consider the final transition, right? We're removing the parents, the biggest advocates, the super moms and the super dads from the situation. And we're saying that child is essentially on their own. They have family supports, they've got other supports, but mom and dad are not there making the day-to-day decisions. And because of this big, drastic change in the routine, we really advise our clients to make this move, or this final, so to speak, transition prior to mom and dad passing away. And that's hard. I mean, I have this conversation with my own mom about my own brother, is my mom needs to be prepared, and you as parents need to be prepared to move that young adult into their final home or final facility sooner rather than later, because you will know first and foremost before anyone else if something's wrong. If they're not taking to their new place, if they're being neglected, if they're just off, you will know that before anyone else. And that gives us the flexibility and the time to bring them back home and find another place, or find other caretakers and support. So very important that we start building a timeline to say, hey, when you're in your late 60s, early 70s, you're up in age physically, it might be tougher for you to care for him or her. We probably should do that now and transition them out, then wait until we can't do a redo button. We can't bring you back to life. We can't make those decisions once they're already made when you're gone. And so that's why we always say it's never too early to begin. Start now, start having these conversations, the better your child's life and lifestyle will be in the future. The second to the bottom point, I think it's second to bottom, the important to remain flexible. I can't stress this enough. When we sit down and we plan for our families, the plan we create today is not going to be the same plan next year or the year after, right? It's a direction. Which way are we going? What do we know is going to be the outside variables that we account for? The same thing happens residentially. Texas is, the landscape in our community is changing every single day. There's new facilities popping up. There's new regulations. I mean, gosh knows if they'll ever unfreeze the Medicaid waivers to get us more families with supports. I mean, we do not know. And so to remain flexible and to build a plan to be as flexible as possible, that is the name of the game. And so what we ask and what we'll go through today is just ideas. Let's start formulating what we want the plan to be. Then we can slowly implement it over time. So where do we start? So the first question and the most important question to ask and answer is, geographically, where do you want your young adult to live? Is it here in Houston? Is it in Austin? Is it in Dallas? Is it across the country? Is it in Mexico? Is it in India? I mean, we literally work with families that are scattered or will be scattered throughout the globe, moving back to the UK, moving overseas to India. You need to decide that first, or have an idea of where they're going to live first, because that dictates everything else. Once we have an idea of the geographical location, we go and say, okay, so we know they're either going to live here. I'm going to use Chicago and Houston as an example. We know they're either going to live in Houston or Chicago. Okay, check that box. That narrows it down to 2 cities and 2 states. What is the preference or the level of care that our young adult needs today and will need in the future? Do we think there's some progression that can happen with additional therapies and supports, or do we think we're pretty much set at the same situation moving forward for the next 20, 30 years? So deciding the level of care is important. Then we worry about guardianship, all right? Depending on the level of care, depends on what type of decision-making authority you need to have, or an outside family or another family member needs to have. So guardianship is very important, because at the age of 18, they're adults. If we're going to start looking at residential facilities and where they're going to be living, either in a private home or not, we need to understand who's going to be making day-to-day decisions, financial decisions, healthcare decisions. Extremely important. Once we know where they're going to live, the level of care, who's going to be making the decisions, we look at saying, okay, let's quantify these different scenarios. Staying in Houston, let's look at local support, let's look at state level support, let's look at national support. The good thing is national support is pretty much even across the board. But between here in Houston or here in Chicago, the state Medicaid programs look completely different. We want to add another step forward. If they move to California, there's some additional money on top of SSI, and there's additional supports from a Medicaid waiver standpoint. So that is why it's crucial to first locate geographically where they're going to be, and then work our way down. So once we've calculated the resources, we've identified what resources are going to be there local, state, and nationally, then we can start building a team, right? Obviously, Tinja and I would love to support you guys. We would engage attorneys here locally, because that's where we're going to be drafting all the documents. But if there is a transition plan to go to Chicago, then we need to be ready to engage an attorney that resides and practices in Illinois. That's where they're going to live, not here. Once we've kind of built the team, we understand, we can start exploring residential options in terms of group facilities, because we typically like building a few different scenarios. We like looking at group facilities, okay, public and private pay. Then we like looking at private facilities in terms of, and when I say facilities, I mean private home. Just for the record, when I reference private home, I mean the home that you own deeded to the special needs trust, and that's where that young adult's going to live, in the home that you have. Okay, so that's what I mean when I mean private home. So we'll go through questioning, and again, this is not all done in the first year. This is just There's too many there flexible variables. There's too many other priorities that can be in line, but this is, again, a direction, a conversation that's going to be ongoing and ever changing. So let me go back to this. So we've identified geographically where they're going to live. We have discussed with family and outside professionals the level of care that's going to be needed there to support your young adult. Now we need to identify the government benefits on the local, state, and national level. We've talked about this in the last presentation. We will we'll touch on it today. Obviously, age of 18, if your child doesn't have $2,000 in their name, doesn't earn over a certain amount of income a month, and has a disability that's recognized by Social Security, they can check the box, they'll receive SSI and Medicaid. We're not starting from zero. So when we've identified where they're going to live, we identified the level of care, when we go to quantify what needs to be there financially, we're not starting from zero, because we at least have SSI, and that's $794 a month. We at least have Medicaid. We might not have the Medicaid waivers, but we at least have Medicaid, assuming we can check the boxes and be eligible. So we know that's there. There's additional programs that we all need to be aware of, because at the end of the day, money is not, there's not an infinite amount of money. There's a finite amount. Whatever you leave behind from insurance, from IRAs, from 401ks, from proceeds from rental properties, that's the money we have to deal with. And that's the money that has to last, in some cases, 50 or 60 years. And so we need to identify these other programs to stretch the dollar even more. And these programs would be like food stamps. I don't think we're going to need heating assistance here in Texas unless we have another snowstorm, but in Chicago, you might need some heating assistance. Section 8 vouchers, public housing, all of these are additional benefits to consider when making the decision of what's going to be option A and what's going to be option B or C. Because at the end of the day, like I said, there's got to be multiple avenues. There's got to be multiple plans. It's not just one. It's got to be multiple, because we've got to be flexible. Because we're going to talk about what happens, or what we're seeing from a dialogue and conversation on the national and state level that can affect this. And that's why we have to be flexible. So then we have entitlement benefits. So SSI, boom, Medicaid. We qualify, no more 2,000, incomes under a certain limit, and they have a disability. But then there's additional benefits like SSDI, child's benefit, RSDI, and Medicare. And so most of us on this call have a young adult that had the disability occur prior to the age of 22. Most of our kiddos were either born with it or was early diagnosis. Because of that, they will receive, or they are entitled to receive, a portion of your Social Security record along with Medicare. And that looks like, and we've talked about this before, but just a summary, the day you retire, start receiving Social Security, age 67, let's just say, you retire at 67, start claiming Social Security. You will get your check, and your young adult will get up to 50% of that check. So your check, they receive their check. The day you pass away, it's up to 75%. So if you get $2,800, the day you retire, you get $2,800. Your son or daughter will get $1,400. The day you pass away, it goes from $1,400 to $2,100. Again, we're not starting from zero. We have some buffer or some assistance there, a foundation there. So Medicaid comes with SSI. So Medicaid is the basic health insurance. Medicaid is king when it comes to planning. We're always trying to preserve Medicaid if this young adult that we're planning for is going to be financially dependent upon either what we leave behind or government support programs. Medicaid is extremely important to be there and to always be eligible for. Because with Medicaid, you'll see in the bottom bullet point, without Medicaid, if they're not eligible for Medicaid, they're typically not eligible for Medicaid waivers like HCS and CLAS. And specifically what we're talking about in this program, in this workshop, is HCS, Home Community Services. If you have not put your son or daughter on the Medicaid waiting list, do it tonight. Reach out to Tinja and I. We'll get you a Medicaid one-pager. You have to do it. You have to. The waiting list is 15 to 20 years. You need to start doing that now. I don't care how old your kid is. So types of Medicaid programs. These are just a list of different Medicaid programs that are nationally mandated. With these, you have CHIP, you have the Medicaid buy-in program, you've got the different Medicaid waiver programs here in Texas, like MDCP, CLASS, Texas Home Living, HCS. There's a multitude of different programs for Medicaid, but again, at the end of the day, we have to preserve eligibility for Medicaid. Very rarely will it be because of the disability. Now, if the disability is not recognized or the evaluation isn't strong enough, then they wouldn't qualify that way. But typically what disqualifies most of the people when it comes to the Medicaid is the financial side. Either they have a job and they earn too much, or they have more than $2,000 in their name and they're disqualified for a certain portion. So again, it's all about preserving eligibility once we're on it. When we talk about Medicaid waivers, one of the most important waiver long-term, if we're talking about residential specifically, is HCS. I'm not saying that as a broad 100% for every single family. Obviously, we compare and contrast the Medicaid waiver programs and see which one's going to be better suited for your needs or their needs. But residentially, we're talking HCS. And that is a Medicaid waiver program that can help provide additional support at home or at their home if they're living elsewhere. Again, you can't be eligible for this if you're not eligible for basic Medicaid. Eligibility is important. And this is just a list of just some bullet points. The waiting lists are long. Again, please put them on the list. Do not wait. There is no, apply early as age 18 to 21. No, not in Texas. You start as soon as you get a diagnosis. You should put them on that list. What we're going to see here in a second is politically, both sides of the aisle, both state and national, there are talks of what to do with Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security. There's a lot of unknown. And that's why, from a planning perspective, we look at one plan with benefits and one plan without benefits and see whether or not we're going to be successful in both. Because one of the biggest talks that we're seeing is putting Medicaid waivers into block grants and capping the spending programs. And that would not be good. Even though our lists have been frozen since 2005, we don't want any more restrictions on what's already been a depleted, underfunded services. And so it's important, and that's our job. That's what we would be hired for, is to help monitor this for all of you guys. But do know that just because the program level of support is one thing today does not guarantee it's going to be the same in 15 or 20 or 30 years. It more than likely will change. To what? To better or worse? I don't know. It's a coin flip. I can't tell you. But I can tell you that it will change because it's not sustainable one way or the other right now. And so we have to be prepared for that. And if we are solely reliant upon Medicaid funding and HCS and all of that, and we don't leave enough money behind in a trust, that can change lifestyles and put additional stress on outside family members to support. So it's very important, again, start planning early. So we've identified geographically where we're going to go. We've identified the need that our young adult's going to need. We've identified the local, state, and national benefits that are there. We've started to quantify the gap of what the monthly need is from a financial and what the government benefits, that little shortfall or that gap. How do we provide financial assistance? You just told me I can't have more than $2,000 in my kid's name, can't earn over a certain amount per month. So how do we do that? Through special needs trusts. If you're planning on essentially leaving a legacy to your son or your daughter, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, we're using a special needs trust. And that allows us to leave large amounts of money, to leave, a home, to leave a vehicle for primary transportation reasons to this young adult with special needs and not disqualify them for Medicaid. Again, Medicaid is key. Using special needs trust allows us to leave $1,000 or $100 million. That won't be counted as a resource as long as it's drafted well and as long as we don't use it for certain purposes, which we can go down that on a different workshop. I'm going to take a pause real quick. I think there was some chat.
Yes, there's a question from Tammy.
So Tammy, yes, you should put them on the waiting list for HCS. Start that clock. You don't have to take HCS support if 15 years down the line, class is great. You don't necessarily need to take HCS, but yes, please put them on that waiting list this weekend to start that clock. I think Inger or Christina will have the info from the first session. So another vehicle to not only leave a legacy, but more importantly, when we think residentially, to pay the bills, to pay the day-to-day expenses, the other vehicle to utilize is the ABLE account. And whether or not you have an ABLE account now doesn't necessarily impact anything in the future, but do know if you work with us, your child will have an ABLE account in the future. Without a doubt, they will. The reason why is the ABLE account is extremely flexible in paying for day-to-day expenses and for paying for residential options, like paying mortgages or paying rent. Very, very flexible. There are a few downsides with the ABLE account. If we're dependent upon SSI, if the account's over $100,000, then we lose SSI. We do not lose Medicaid, and we only lose SSI until the account gets below 100,000. We can only contribute, everyone in the world to your son and daughter can only contribute a total of $15,000 a year. So there are limits there. And there's a payback on the ABLE account. So the day that your son or daughter passes away, 50, 60, 70 years on the line, whatever is in that ABLE account will be, Medicaid gets reimbursed first before the funds. Now, I will tell you, we as a community and as a whole population, we are utilizing the ABLE account correctly. The ABLE account was never meant to be the legacy account. Meaning, okay, mom and dad have, $2 million in life insurance, we die, boom, there goes $2 million. No, that's not what the ABLE account's for. The ABLE account is supposed to be like a checking account. You don't keep $100,000 in your checking account. You keep $100,000 in a savings account or a 401k or an IRA. The Ohio ABLE Association, whatever they're called, they did a survey on all the ABLE accounts that utilize Ohio and all across the country. And the average is about $8,000 in that ABLE account. That's the right amount. We do not want to overfund the ABLE account because of this payback provision. So like I said, whether you have one now or not, you're going to in the future, because this is going to make the next in line person's life a lot easier when paying for those monthly expenses, housing, utilities, day-to-day expenses for the young adult with special needs. We got, okay, so Anne was just, saying. So it's all about maximizing the options. We've narrowed all of the funnels down. We understand what the need is. It's how do we efficiently get the money from the trust and the ABLE account to, the bill collectors, paying the rent, mortgage, the providers, the home providers, the care providers, all of that. Using an ABLE account, using a special needs trust, extremely, extremely important. So then we get down to the person-centered planning and the considerations. It's not always as simple, not always, it's never as simple as saying, okay, where are they going to live? check that box. We're good to go. We've got to think of other things. If our young adults are able to work or they're socially active, they have a lot of friends, they have a lot of social groups. Transportation, what does that look like? Does the facility that your young daughter or son's going to, do they allow transportation off campus? How much support is needed and how much of the support is covered, right? We just, like I said, we met with Brookwood this morning, fantastic residential facility out in West Houston, but their base monthly rent, about $4,600, $4,700, there's still additional costs that aren't included in that. And so if we're looking at residential options, we need to make sure that all of the support we've identified as needed is covered either by the tuition or by HCS or the waiver programs. If not, we've got to cover that through the trust. So we need it, once we've identified the need, we have to make sure the need is answered by funds, with funds. You know, we also need to ask the question of not only where are the caregivers and siblings, but the level of involvement from a residential standpoint are they going to have? You know, do you want them to live in a facility close to brother and sister so that brother and sister can see them 2 times a week or once a week? Do we want to have a private home near brother and sister so that brother and sister can check in on their sibling once or twice a week, or if not more? When we talk about other families to partner with, that's the private home route, which we're going to talk about. Is there a way to partner with other families that have kids in a similar situation so that the financial burden is spread across multiple families and is not just on your back? Just talk about the. So, Anne,
Yes,
what are my?
Brian, yeah, exactly. I was going to say that Anna posted a question there.
Yeah, so Anna, I'm a chartered special needs consultant. So that's my certification. So that just means we've gone through rigorous coursework to work with families with loved ones with special needs, fully licensed. So in terms of investment and advice on insurances, on investments, on alternative investments, I am fully licensed. Tinja and I act as fiduciaries. So we are fiduciaries in terms of planning. There's not a level higher than that in terms of fiduciaries. And that's kind of where we're at right now. All right, so getting back to this. So I'm going to go on to the next one. So the range of residential options. So again, going through the funnel, geographically, level of need, local support, quantifying the need. Let's start looking at what options are available. And I want to take a pause here. Tinja, again, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but I think it's really cool. Do you have that residential map you can showcase again? I'll give you a few seconds. And so for our clients, what we've done is we've built an interactive map in Texas and Maryland and California to show residential options that we know of. We are not saying we know every place in all of those states, but we're telling you these are what we've researched and we've found. Once we've identified all of those questions prior, we need to start exploring the options for the plans. And so this is like a Texas map. And so when you click on and you've identified the geographical location in Houston, okay, great. Let's go look at different residential options. Identify it in Dallas or Austin, because there's questions that we need to identify depending on the location. Do they accept Medicaid funding? Are they private pay? Do they have flexible hours for visitation for family members? You know, all of these questions that you be asked, and that's what this map's hopefully supposed to do. But we're continuously adding to this. If you know of other residential options, please let us know. We'll put it on the map. This is really just meant as a guiding, principle for our families. Go back. Sure. Did get. And then, so we've got independent living. So these are for young adults that literally can live independent or as independent as possible. But maybe we need to build a parachute and say, what happens if they stumble? What happens if they regress? need additional reinforcement, we can build a plan to that. They have their own apartment, you're still there, maybe helping financially, but for the most part, they're on their own. One of the ones that we find is kind of like the least liked option, just because parents don't want the burden and responsibility to pass on too much, but family home, siblings homes. Are they going to go live with a sibling? For my family, it's always been expected and assumed that James is going to come live in the same property as me, without a doubt. My wife, I married that way. My wife understands that's the responsibility that's going to happen, but some families just don't want that. That's okay, but it is still an option. So again, please be flexible. It's still an option. We have intermittent supports in one's own home. And so again, this is mom and dad own a home and they both pass away, and upon passing, the deed of the home transfers to a special needs trust, and that young adult stays in that home. It's not counted as an asset because it's in a special needs trust, and we use Medicaid waivers to bring in support for that young adult to live there. There's adult foster care as well. There's other options on the next page. And there's group residencies, which the third bullet point, the group residencies private pay. This is the number one, we mentioned wave. The number one wave for what we see in the community is families are right now saying, I will leave a home to my son's trust, and we'll have 2 or 3 roommates. We'll cost share the utilities. They'll cost share the property taxes. They'll cost share all the overnight care provider. That way, it's not on one person. We'll bring in, the qualification is all the residents there have to be HCS eligible. They have to be receiving HCS funds. So they'll bring in their own care specifically through their own programs. But this is something that we're seeing take off like wildfire in our community. And we have even our own clients are saying, hey, if you have 2 or 3 families that my child's situation that are similar, let's link up and let's see if this is an option. So this is something that we're seeing, and we're going to dive into a little bit of the weeds here in a second. But there are plenty of options. It's not state-run facility or group home only. There are other options that you need to be aware of and be flexible about saying, hey, let's explore this. One thing that I think we overlook a lot when it comes to residential options is if your young adult is got the capacity, ask them. Don't always just assume and make the decisions for them, but ask them. Do they want to live close to brother or sister? Do they want to go to a group home, or do they want to live on their own? Do they want to have roommates? If so, how many, or do they not? Ask them. We want their feedback because it's their life. So let's not always just assume what's going to happen. If they've got the capacity, let's ask them and let's get them involved in the decision. Because again, the decision made today is not a final decision. It's conversations over years that we are just molding the plan to what happens in their life. So when we talk about residential options from a private standpoint, right? Mom and dad do them all. It's one-stop shop. That's what they're going to set up. There are additional questions we have to ask is how do we set it up inside of the trust? If we do it where there's multiple families and it's outside the trust, do we want to set up an LLC, a partnership, or an S corp? Do we need to set up a board of directors for that property? How is that property going to be owned and sold? If your young adult passes away 50, 60 years from now, how do we liquidate that for the other siblings or grandkids in that situation? I guess there wasn't this slide, but there's other questions that we're going to go over and go granular when it comes to private residential options. And then if we do go that route, is there programs, state programs that can assist us? The answer is yes. But what state you live on, again, geographic location definitely impacts the answer to this. So I think it's on this one. So, home mortgage fund providers. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, those are national programs. They'll help individuals with limited incomes, AKA young adults with special needs, find and get loans for mortgages if we want to do the private route. HUD will also help us look at and purchase properties with below market price. There's auctions all the time that happen that are foreclosed that we can go buy, or we can use HUD to find other below market homes. We don't have to do it ourselves. We have other agencies that will help. The voucher program. If we go and we purchase a home and there's a mortgage on the home and we need assistance with a mortgage, well, there's that there. It's the 30 or 40% subsidy. So it all depends on what eventually ends up happening, but there's more options than you think. There's a lot more options than you think. And so these are additional community-based service supports. We've already talked about SSI and SSDI, but again, financially, we're not starting from zero. You do not have to leave tens of millions of dollars behind. There are other supports. We just have to quantify that gap and make sure that we at least fund the gap. So these are some of the questions that you need to ask and discuss with your family members before going down the private route. Is number of occupants. Does your son or your daughter do well with roommates, or they do better on their own? The paid staff, is it a 1-to-1 ratio, or if there's 3 people, can it be a 1-to-3 ratio in terms of staff in that house? Is there 24/7 care, or do they only really need care while they're awake? While they're sleeping, you just need a nighttime nanny to just check in, make sure they're okay if they wake up. Are you financing it privately, or are you going to pool funds with other investors and purchase this home with other families? And then you need to have an agreement in place with those families. How does the process work if you were to replace a roommate, or someone was to move on or pass away? Do you slowly close down the home, or do you just constantly refill it and let it be its own machine? So these aren't, the ideas and options are out there, and there's a lot of them that might sound well, but we need to make sure we go down the questioning route to make sure it's a viable solution for what we're trying to find. And then we after doing all that, build out that strategic plan. And so once we've identified 2 or 3 different options, we've asked the questions for the person-centered planning. We look at the legal and financial skeleton that needs to be there. Are the legal documents in place for all roommates or just one? Are the financial agreements in place for all the roommates, or is it just your child? We need to make sure that everything's solid, because the worst thing that can happen is you agree to something and then 10 years in, one of the roommates has to drop out because they can't afford it anymore. Now we're starting from scratch. So we need to make sure we have a strategic plan around that. Not just longevity of the assets, but we also have to protect the assets from theft and misuse and lawsuits. And so we have to make sure that we structure not just the property, but the ownership of the land, the trust in a certain way to protect that asset. We don't want predators to come out of the woodwork and prey on our vulnerable kiddos just because we see that they have a home and they've got some financial means. And then making sure that we have a linear decision-making tree, 2 or 3 deep. Who's going to make the decisions when you're gone? Who's going to make the decisions when they're gone? We have a plan in place. So this is kind of talking about some of the solutions. So obviously, like I said, whether or not you have an able account today doesn't matter. You're going to have one in the future because it's the most flexible, useful vehicle for paying day-to-day expenses. Consider having a survivorship life insurance policy. If you're married, but that is one way to leave a large legacy in a very cost-effective way. It's paying the premium and getting 100 times what you've put in terms of an insurance policy. Making sure the estate plan's tight, meaning there's no loose ends, there's no loopholes, there's no pitfalls. If there's other siblings in play, we need to make sure that we carve out a certain piece of the pie and it goes to the special needs trust the right way. And we're not having joint ownership of a home. We're not saying, okay, the home that mom and dad lives in is going to be a third, but Johnny's third is going to special needs trust. It doesn't work that way. So we need to make sure that the assets flow correctly and there's not joint ownership with the special needs trust and outside entities. So we kind of zoomed through it. There was a lot. I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. But again, start early, remain flexible. That's the name of the game for this. It's going to change year in and year out. If you want to start that process, reach out to us. We'll sit down. We'll start analyzing the situations, what's around you, what's here in Texas, what's here elsewhere in other states. We'll help you identify the supports and the housing resources. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just have the conversation, either with us, with your family. Start having these conversations, start thinking about the future. But do know there's plenty of options. There is always going to be a solution for your need or issue. You don't have to fit a square peg into a round hole. I mean, we can find a square hole to solve your issues. Any questions before we kind of call it an evening? But is there any other questions?
Sure, this is Tammy. I've been posting a lot in the chat because my husband and I have recently started this planning, and I guess one of the concerns I have is about the safeguard of the government benefits. And it's because I have started applying for my 19-year-old son on the spectrum, and I'm finding it's not quite that easy to get SSI and Medicaid. And I've been rejected for SSI. I messed up my first Medicaid application as part of the class, and so he was rejected. So I guess I don't share the optimism that I can count on a national safety net. So how do you help people who are struggling to get to first base?
So Family to Family Network is, if we're doing baseball terminology, they're the Jose Altuve for hitting, little base hits. They will get you to first and second base. They'll sit down and they'll walk you through. They've got like a fee for service where they'll sit down with you and walk you through the applications, making sure that we're not filling out questions incorrectly, because they are tricky, right? Are they asking me, or are they asking from my child's perspective? And sometimes we might answer those incorrectly. Sometimes it's just going through the medical evaluation and making sure certain terminologies are there, because we are programmed from the get-go to always want to showcase the abilities and the good things that they can do and the great marks that they got through high school when it comes to what they can achieve. But when it comes to applying for benefits, we want to paint the opposite picture of what they can't or need additional supports for. Because Social Security does not want to see in an evaluation report could potentially be employable in the future. They're not going to like that. They're wanting to know what the current situation is and do they need the supports today. And so Family to Family will sit down with you and help you go through that. I mean, yes, exactly. Think of the worst day and describe that. That is exactly the mentality you have to have on the applications. And that's what Family to Family will help you with. We also have, if you might not have a very strong evaluation for your child, Dr. Montfort, Natalie Montfort in the Houston area, has been a lifesaver for a lot of our families in describing the situation. She knows, because of personal experience with her own kiddos, what to put in evaluation. So if that's an issue, we definitely need to get you plugged in with her so you can get a strong evaluation that's hard for them to say, denied. Don't ever take no as a final answer. Tammy, always appeal. You have 60 days of appeal. Always, if there's new information, reapply. There is zero reason for us to be comfortable with a denial or no if you truly feel like your child needs supports and they truly need supports. Family is that's the first base. I mean, we need to get you there. We need to make sure that we get you signed up on those lists and make sure we appeal the process of him being denied for class. The person that you're working with should be able to help you on that. Are you working with any advisors, or is it kind of just you and your family doing it yourselves?
So we've been working with, a couple of years ago, we worked with Steve Radigan, and we've been working with Terry Miller on the life, Tracy Miller on the life insurance. We went to Wilson and Hayes and got the special needs trust. And then when he turned 18, we finally came up on the class list after I put him on a class list in 2007. And in late 2020, right after he graduated from high school, we finally got through. So I've been working with Easter Seals as I guess it's the the provider, and then there's Disability Services of the Southwest. I can't remember the right terminology, but those are the two that are working with us. We applied for Medicaid. We were rejected because I guess I messed up the financial part of it. The class people, Easter Seals evaluation seems like he could qualify for services. But of course, as you point out, the important thing is getting that Medicaid. And I'm reapplying. We applied for SSI. We were denied. Unfortunately, we consulted an attorney in the Heights who gave us bad information, who told us not to appeal, which in hindsight was not good advice, right?
Yeah.
Right. If I may say, Tammy, if you want to give us a call to our office, I'm going to put the number here. I guess you have called us before. We can give you definitely some guidelines about how to go with the application. We can't guarantee it, but of course, with the experience of the people that work in our group, you might have better luck, I suppose.
You definitely will have better luck. Yeah, well, they'll definitely help you. And of course, they'll reach out if there's any like very unique situations and questions. Like we will find a solution for you.
Right, because we'll use the right terminology that they're using on their documents. We want to use to help you fill out your documents. So when they say, is this child able to do work? And if it says that the information is this child is unable to work before whatever reason, medication, travel, whatever it is, we want to make sure that you use the right terminologies in order to complete your paperwork. That's the first guideline.
Yeah, Tammy, I set up a meeting in the next couple of weeks with Family to Family, and then we'll go from there. And because you definitely need, I mean, with his age, you need to get some some benefits in place. Contact our office is either Tinger or I's email, which we can put in the chat, or give us a call, and we'll put our contact information here in the chat. Reach out to us. Let's sit down and let's just look at the big picture, because we definitely want to. We don't necessarily want to jump the gun. You know, the first session was 30,000 foot overview, 10 basic steps. We need to start understanding what concepts we're going to talk about. The way we structured this family wise is we're going to have a new topic every month to discuss, but please don't take this as the second workshop. This is the second thing you need to check off your list. There's other things that are more important than deciding the residential options, like making sure we get SSI and Medicaid, making sure we're on the Medicaid waiver list, making sure that there's money but set aside, making sure that there's legal documents in place. But this is just a very, very common topic, and that's why we're discussing it today. So please I don't want you to do things out of order. There is an order to do things, and it's check these boxes first, and then we can worry about residential and long-term stuff.
And I think also working with our small group too, you can plan it out. If you can see the plan, work the plan out and go step by step, that will help you. So when we start our small group and you come and we start detailing what is needed, what this child, what is the vision? First of all, what do you want to see that family member, or what is going to take place? You want to plan it all out, because if you see it written, then you can kind of follow and you have those steps to follow. But we'll give you that information. So not only you'll have the small group, but you'll still continue to have the classes. So it'll help you step by step. But anytime that you have a question, you get stumped on anything, Brian, Tanja, Mary Jane, Christina, we have Judy, Leslie, they're all here to help you. So don't think once you get stumped on this place, you say, okay, where do I go? If you don't know anywhere else to go, pick up the phone, email us and let us know. We're here to help you, because we want you to be successful, because it's all about having a good life. So just remember, our small group is available for you in your community. And then also Family to Family Network is always here for you. And Brian, Tanja will be there as well.
Yep.
So are there any more questions that you may have? Don't think that it's a question that somebody's asked before, because yours may be unique.
And please fill out the survey before you disconnect.
Yeah, please. I mean, please fill out the survey. Not because I want to be told like how much I stutter and all that other stuff, but it's just, it helps us understand what's going to happen next. It helps us get accountability, and we can actually show progress of the families that we're impacting and giving you guys research or resources to. So please, from a family perspective, please fill out those surveys.
Yes, and if you have a question that we have not answered, just remember, you can ask it. If you don't want to ask it here, you can always email us or, reach out to us. We want to help.
Yeah.
Any other, don't forget the survey. Don't forget the survey. And see you guys at the next class. And I wanted to tell you the next class is going to be August the 12th. And it will be the same time we do. And I would like to apologize for all the changes that we had this time. And I do appreciate y'all taking y'all time out to come at 3:30 to 4:30. But the next class will be from 12 to 1. You can go ahead and start registering now, and we'll see you there.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tinja.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. I appreciate
Thank
y'all.
you. I hope you feel better, Tanja.